In my hand right now, I hold something that has the capacity to access every bit of knowledge that humankind has accumulated over the history of the planet. If that is, it wasn't on airplane mode. But see, the thing is that this is something that people never would have expected. If I went back 200, 300, 1,000 years ago and said, you know what, many years into the future, I'm going to stand on a stage and be able to speak at a crowd over these things called speakers that will carry my voice and spread it across the room, and hold the collective history and knowledge of mankind in my hand, they'd say, let me show you to the nearest mental institution where they can take care of you. But instead, I'm here and this is real. And the beautiful nature of this is that we never know what's coming next in human history. We never anticipate the beautiful leap forward that technology and now robots will bring to our society. We could never have expected how long our lives would become, how easy it would be to travel and meet people of new cultures like those in this room. And because we believe that an optimistic viewpoint is one that is absolutely necessary if we'd like to look forward and progress as humankind, we are so proud to propose the motion. This House welcomes the entrance of a large number of robots into the workforce. In my speech today, I'll begin by offering some definitions to clarify the motion. I will then move on to offer the first 2 points on the proposition side, which are firstly, that robots lead to increased productivity, and secondly, that they fill unwanted or dangerous jobs. Our third speaker will present the point that this will create societal shifts. Now, let's move into some definitions. We define a large number as enough robots in multiple sectors to shift work patterns. We define robots as any programmed machine operating autonomously or semi-autonomously. And lastly, we define welcome in this way. We are open to them entering the workforce after a long enough period of time to allow for the economy to adapt to the change and to prepare and guide workers to work with the new technology that they'll see coming forth in society. Now let's move on to just present what we're going to be advocating for on our side. So this is an overall picture of the arguments that we'll be giving you. Since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, technology has radically changed how we live. From the steam engine to the computer, technology has brought challenges, but we have welcomed those challenges and benefited from them. Robots are the next step in this march of progress. And what we will prove to you today is that robots are welcome because they will have the unique capacity to improve our lives in ways that we have never seen them improved before. They will free us from dangerous jobs. They will help expand our lives. They will help countries compensate for changing demographics. They can go in and compensate for natural disasters and save lives. And this is why we propose the motion today. Now, our first point is about how robots will increase the productivity of society as a whole. By augmenting human capacity, by increasing output per hour, this will free people from much more intellectually demanding jobs. Robots can increase output by themselves and spur economic growth. This means that while we, humans, can only work for a limited amount of time, while we're subject to psychological and physical limitations, robots only need an occasional changing of the parts or reprogramming, so they can work for much longer hours and complete physically demanding tasks that humans cannot do on our own. Furthermore, what we understand is that productivity will lead to lower prices, and at the same time, people will be able to access the benefits of those prices and purchase products for less money than they were able to before. Now, the opposition is probably going to get up here and say, but everyone's jobs will be taken by the robots, so no one will ever be able to buy these goods. But we have a few reasons that employment will remain high. Firstly, people who employ other people aren't stupid. They understand how basic economic principles work. If you're going to sell something, you need people to buy it, and therefore they have the incentive to maintain a workforce. Although we will not be working for as many hours or doing as difficult jobs, which we believe is definitely a good thing, we will still be employed and have enough money that we need. Secondly, we believe that everyone will, well, not everyone, but the majority of society will remain employed because people are voters, and with voting, we have power. We have power to demand when enough is enough, or when we need to see changes to keep our jobs the way that they are. So overall, what we see is that robots can actually help solve a variety of problems in different economies and in many different countries by increasing productivity and helping to increase the power of the workforce when dealing with economic problems. For example, in Japan, the demographics are shifting. The majority of the working age population is becoming much older and retiring, and this is placing great burdens on the rest of society. People are having to sacrifice their incomes in order to care for the elderly. So Japan has adapted.
They've created robots that can work in elderly homes, and they've created robots that even run a hotel, which means that people no longer have to care for their elderly and completely sacrifice their ability to make money and put food on the table. While they still, of course, love and care for their elderly in their own way, it doesn't take up all of their time, yes.
The only reason Japan needs robots is because they're afraid of opening their borders and allowing immigration to relieve unemployment in more struggling countries.
The reason that Japan needs robots is not necessarily because they're afraid of everyone else in the world. It's because of demographic shift and because they have the capacity to invest in this technology. Now, moving back to our point, we can understand that overall, employment will be shifted and not replaced, and people generally will have access to more goods than they ever did before at cheaper prices. This helps people who are impoverished because the impoverished need these lower prices and able to access goods. So what we see is that robots overall, by increasing productivity, create accessibility of products for the majority of people, thereby helping them lead better lives. Now, the second point that we have for you today on the proposition is about filling undesirable jobs. Because robots have different skill sets than humans and can't actually feel many emotions, they can fill jobs that put humans in great risk. They respond to dangerous disaster situations all over the world after crises where humans can't step in to help other humans. Now we have robots stepping in to help other humans. After 9/11, when the Twin Towers toppled, rescue workers couldn't get to the places in the rubble to save people's lives because it was far too dangerous. There were fires, there was treacherous situation. They didn't know where they would stand. So they sent in robots, which actually helped identify where people were so that they could be freed from under the rubble and remain living their lives. Furthermore, we see that with the disaster, the nuclear meltdown in Fukushima, there's too much radiation for humans to go in and fix the plants. And what this means is that over time, radiation is leaking and people are being exposed to so many different chemicals that it's causing rates of cancer, it's increasing death, and it's harming the people of that population. But Japan is developing robots to help deal with these problems. They're making sure that robots can go in and fix these problems and clean up toxic waste so that humans can continue to live productive lives. Furthermore, as I said, when we see in certain situations like environmental disasters, people cannot fix the environment because it's too dangerous. With Deepwater Horizon, there was an oil tanker that was leaking hundreds of thousands of gallons of oil into the ocean. It was polluting our ecosystem, it was corrupting the ocean, and it was killing off marine life. But it was a kilometer deep. People could not get there. Robots had the unique capacity to go and stop those leaks, to clean up after the terrible decision that society made, and help make sure that our environment, which is our lifeblood, was preserved. Overall, we understand that robots can fill so many dangerous jobs in society. They can take certain manufacturing jobs that actually lead to the deaths of 960,000 people a year. They can take those jobs from those who are struggling every day. They can help humans reach our full potential and move past life-threatening situations, increase our productivity, and help us overall achieve things that we never knew we could achieve. Robots will be the next iPhone. They'll be the next man on the moon. They'll help us to progress as an entire society, and this is why we're proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'd now like to welcome Nikki to open the opposition's argument.
The march of history will continue. That's what we said 50 years ago when we thought every car would be powered by a nuclear reactor in the trunk. But 50 years from now, all nuclear power has really given us is the same spills team proposition is trying to figure out a way to clean up. What we see is that it's very hard to move forward when you're walking looking backwards. And that's why team opposition isn't afraid to admit that robots are something different than what we've seen before. This is not the Industrial Revolution. This is not machinery. This is not your laptop. This is something that we haven't seen before. And on opposition, I'll explain to you why that means we should not be willing to embrace it with open arms. In this speech, I'll be doing two things. I'll address the points brought by team proposition, and then present the first two substantive arguments on team opposition. Now, let us begin with the framing and model they granted us. I have to challenge the idea of regulated gradual change, because these robots are not working for this house. The robots are working for the private market, and that means that if I can offer you compelling analysis as to why robots would be adopted quickly in the private market, then we must accept that that's how it would happen, and I will do that in my first substantive argument. Now, on their first argument about productivity. Firstly, they never explained why more productivity is actually good for the worker. Because there's a difference between increasing productivity of workers and increasing productivity of society. If you give a worker a better tool, make them able to do more, that makes the worker more valuable, it makes the worker be paid more, and we think that's great. But robots don't augment workers. Robots replace workers. The factory might be more productive, but the workers themselves haven't become more valuable. They've become less valuable. And that is why robots are so different from the kind of change that has come before. And team proposition offered you absolutely no analysis as to why this kind of productivity would be at all beneficial for the worker. Secondly, what they said is that they can find unemployment in more intellectually demanding jobs. We think that that is exactly the problem, because it's very hard to go from a factory worker to a mechanical engineer in 3 years. What we argue is the fact that only intellectually demanding jobs would remain is exactly the problem, because so many people don't have the tools available to make the jump to those jobs. Again, they fail to explain why this would mitigate any of the unemployment problems caused by robotics. Yes.
We see that you've conveniently ignored our analysis about the fact that actually people who are producing won't just fire their workers because they need people to purchase their products.
Yeah, so let's talk about this third argument, about because of basic economic logic, people won't fire workers. Now, if you understand basic economic logic, what you understand is that no employer hires people to do nothing. You can't afford to do that in a real market. If you can replace a worker with a cheaper, faster, better robot, that's what you'll do. On a societal level, does it make sense to keep employing people? Yeah. But jobs and employers aren't worried about the societal level. They're worried about their profit margins, and economics dictates that they must replace their workers with robots. That is simple economic logic, not what you proposed. Finally, they say that we need this because it will help compensate for demographic changes. What we argue is that at the point where there is still massive unemployment around the globe, demographic changes should be seen as an opportunity, not as a problem. Countries that have demographic challenges should be opening their borders and welcoming those who have no opportunity for employment in their home country, rather than closing their borders and simply seeking to make those jobs obsolete. When we can't find enough work for humans, we do not see a reason to turn to alternative solutions. Then on the second point, about undesirable jobs or jobs that cannot be done by humans. First of all, specialized robots like cleaning up nuclear power plants don't constitute a large number of robots in the workforce. There just aren't that many Fukushimas in the world. Secondly, they argue that this is entering the workforce. But if I literally couldn't do a job, then that job is not part of the workforce. Sending a robot to Mars isn't taking up a job in the workforce. That's giving us a new capability that we never had before. This isn't actually proposing the motion. Finally, they throw out this number that jobs are dangerous and people die every day. Well, why do people go to dangerous jobs? It's not out of a sense of obligation. It's because it's the only way they can feed their family. We don't think that the solution to dangerous jobs is unemploying these people. We think the solution to dangerous jobs is better oversight, better health and safety, and trying to lift people out of poverty, not relegating them to the dirt of unemployment. Now, allow me to present the first substantive argument on team opposition, which is that robotization would destroy people's livelihoods and leave them unable to sustain their families. This is for a few reasons. Firstly, the pace of change is different than it was in history. Technological growth in spheres like computers and robotics is exponential. It's not linear. As we go on, it happens faster and faster, and that gives people less and less time to respond. Meaning that even though when the steam engine came out, we had time for our economies to adapt, robotic change happens too quickly for people to find new jobs. Secondly, there's a difference between replacement and augmentation. I already articulated this on this point. We're not making workers more powerful, we're replacing them and making them less powerful. Thirdly, accessibility of jobs. They made this point for me when they get up here and say there will be new jobs and they'll be more intellectually demanding. The sad fact of the matter is for many people, intellectually demanding jobs are simply out of reach. education is sadly still a luxury good in many parts of the world. And for us to simply say, don't worry, robotics, people who worked on factory floors can design robots or manage salespeople jobs, that's not logical. We can't simply retrain an entire generation of workforce overnight or even over 10 years. And that's why we think this is such a huge problem and why unemployment will come about in a way that we haven't seen in the past. And thirdly, again, as I already articulated, productivity and employment are not the same thing. If factories make more money but don't need as many workers, then there will be less employment. It's simple economic logic. Now, let us move on to the second substantive argument on team proposition, which is that robotization creates inequality and destroys the power of the worker. There are a few ways this happens. Firstly, it furthers historical inequality. Because in order to benefit from the gains that robots bring, you must be wealthy enough to purchase those robots in the first place. This is true of all technology, and it's why right now is the most unequal planet Earth has been in the history of humanity. Right now, 1% of the world owns more than 95% of the world. Within the next few years, that figure will become 1% owning more than 99% of the world. It is that 1% that stands to benefit from robots, that 1% that has the money to buy them. It is the 99% that are replaced and relegated to the dirt by the implementation of new robots. This will further inequality simply by furthering historical trends. Secondly, robots raise entry barriers into certain fields. No longer can you start your own startup manufacturing business or start your own small agricultural business in order to enter the workforce because of economic competitiveness. If you are substantially less efficient than your competitors, you will go out of business. That's how markets work. And because robots are so much more efficient than humans at working, those jobs that don't have the money to buy robots can't compete, meaning unless you are already rich, there is no potential for entering markets and no potential for bettering yourself. Thirdly, this destroys the power of the worker. Historically, the way that workers have defended their rights is simple. They strike. Because workers control the means of production. If you abuse your workers too much, they stop working for you and your factory shuts down. Where is that in the world of the robot? The worker has lost their power. The worker no longer owns the means of production. It is the 1%, it is those with money, it is those with capital that truly control the market and that truly control economies. What that means is throughout history, the worst abuses have been perpetrated by those who own things against those who work for them. And now the power of those who work has been destroyed. Robots are not the same thing as what we have seen in history. And I hope to explain to you today why there's no reason to welcome with open arms a challenge that brings nothing but hardship and suffering. Thank you.
I'd now like to welcome the second speaker of the proposition, Nicholas.
The march of technology is always scary. The Luddites believed that the machines used in factories today would unemploy them all, and also that they would come alive and destroy their cities. And clearly they were wrong. The truth is that, in fact, technology almost always results in increased productivity. It almost always results in better rights. It almost always results in a world that we would prefer over one without that technology. We can't blame the opposition in this debate. It's always scary not to know what's coming next. But I'm asking you to recognize the beauty in progress and the promise of technology. I'm asking you to be amazed and hopeful and ready for the robot that can do everything from manufacturing to surgery on its own. And I'm asking you to look forward into the future and welcome the new age of robots. And so with that, I'm going to first deconstruct the opposition side in this debate, and then I'm going to rebuild our arguments. So, first of all, I'd like to say that this is really a story of two competing narratives about the way technology exists. They're telling you that technological advancement represents the triumph of capital over the worker, and that it results in the loss of jobs overall. This is a debate about overall trends, and they're arguing for that. We'd like to say that this is not true, and in fact that it's not supported by almost any examples of technological innovation throughout history. We'd like to say that there's a lot of promise in the way technology exists. Look at their own example, nuclear power, that they brought up in their hook. It's a perfect encapsulation of this debate. Of course, we don't have cars that are run by nuclear power right now. But development in alternative forms of energy has resulted in wind power, has resulted in solar power. It's resulted in giving us a way to escape the evils of greenhouse gases and escape global warming to the best degree that we've been able to do it. That's exactly the kind of general trend that we're talking about, regardless of the nitty-gritty. Technology results in increased growth, it results in more rights, it results in a better world. So now let's go on to their first argument, that it'll create job loss. We have a few different answers to this. First of all, we'd like to say that that we're talking about a gradual change here. They said, okay, people won't be able to become mechanical engineers in 3 years. We're not talking about a 3-year period here. We're talking about everywhere from decades to centuries in which robots are taking over the workforce, right? And moreover, we're not talking about the whole world accepting robots at once. We're talking about country by country. Robots are entering the workforce as those countries become more economically developed. What our argument is, it's a far more nuanced view of the way robots are going to be integrated into the workforce. We're telling you that mass production requires mass consumption. That based on basic supply-side economics, employers cannot just say, we're going to pay everybody nothing. Because in order to produce goods and make money from those goods, you also need somebody to buy those goods. And we're saying that people are not so naive that they will not pay any workers anything. We're also saying that this will create a job shift, that the service sector inherently requires people, that you can't have a musician that's a robot and appreciate them in the same way. Right? No one wants to go up there and see a robot perform in the same way that you would want to see Led Zeppelin. And we also tell you that education increases as it is needed, and education reforms itself to fit the way society happens. So, education back in ancient Greek times used to be like a marriage of music, philosophy, and mathematics. And then as the industrial era came, it became what we see it now, which is we sit in frickin' rooms like they're factories, and you sit there and the bell rings just like factory break periods. That's how education is now. What we're telling you is that the introduction of the robot is going to change education as well. Remember that we're talking about really generalized societal shifts here. Well, they're talking about the nitty-gritty that happens along the way. Yep?
You keep trying to prove your point with historical examples, when you've explained time and time again why this is so different from what's come before.
Okay, great. So they say robots are different. Not really. What's the difference between robots and machines? They say robots replace people and machines don't. What are you going to say about the printer? There used to be thousands of people who would sit around copying books all day by hand. Those people were completely replaced by the printer. What are you going to say about the computer? There used to be scribes sitting there, and you used to have to deliver what snail mail? Who uses that anymore, right? The whole point of technology is that it's supposed to replace people. What we're saying is that the job shift, the larger societal trends that happen through technology, are far more valuable. Now, let's go on to our they have one more argument, that it furthers historical inequality. We say that no, robots won't further the inequality, technology gets cheaper. The only thing that they really say about this is that it increases entry costs. We tell you, look at the iPhone, look at the computer. People used to say the same thing, but now, small business owners have computers all the time, and more people have iPhones than have clean water in the world. So technology does get cheaper, it gets more accessible. Now let's go on to our arguments. We tell you that production increases, that robots can work longer, they work faster, they work cheaper, that people will not become less unemployed, and that robots, moreover, can do incredible things. That, in a couple years, scientists over at Stanford will have developed little microbots that can go through your bloodstream and kill cancerous cells. That's incredible. That, we'll be able to soon have robots that are 100% effective in performing basic surgeries. Just the impact to your life that that's going to have is so incredible. You should welcome that. We tell you our second argument, that these take dangerous jobs. They only really point out here that it's not every job, but we're telling you that there's thousands of people who work in dangerous factories where their limbs could be cut off, who work cleaning up toxic waste where they could get radioactive poisoning. You know, these people are going to be really, really helped by technological innovation. And our third argument, that this will create a positive change in the nature of labor, because by decreasing the need for human labor and increasing productivity, the introduction of large numbers of robots into the workforce is going to give humans more leisure and family time, decrease abject poverty, and ultimately enrich your life. What we're saying is that as technology is introduced, what it does is change the way workers work. So let's take a good example to illustrate this point. The 40-hour work week. In response to the increased production created by machines in the industrial age, a lot of people were laid off, right? About 50% of factory workers were laid off. What did they do in response? They used their power of voting. Robots can't vote, but people can. And those people voted for a 40-hour work week. And now, employment is greater than it was back in the industrial era. More people have jobs, and they have jobs with better rights. Child labor, same thing. Children used to work in factories, but then when we increased production enough that they didn't have to anymore, people voted so that children wouldn't have to work in factories anymore. What we're arguing is that the robot represents a really, really great shift here. That robots are going to result in a society in which we have many more rights, that we have the ability to pursue leisure, that people, when they see this great increase in production, are going to vote for things like job sharing, where they don't need to work all day long every day, that we don't need to run the rat race of capitalism anymore. What we're telling you is that they tell you that the robots represent the domination of capital over humanity. What we're saying is no. This represents the freedom from capital. This represents the ability for humanity to say, we don't need to work all the time anymore because we have so much abundance that we don't need to do that, and they'll vote for that. For the millions of people that are going to be helped by this, and for the beauty that robots represent in the future, I urge you to propose.
So it'll be more expensive. That's of course. That's never going to get cheaper than 98%. Meanwhile, originally 1%. Restaurants offer no more strikes. Wait, what do you mean they'll never be cheaper?
You did a good job. Like,
they'll never be cheaper because yeah, it won't get accepted. The industry just makes any inventions that you get technology like so.
I know, like, good, I just want to of your position, Jason.
Leisure society.
Madam Speaker, just because a general trend has happened in the past does not mean that it'll happen in the future. As a great example, USA Blue has won every single one of their debates this tournament, but they're about to lose this round. So let's go on case and look at the points that they brought up. So in their first point, they talked about increased productivity. Nikki told you that this would make workers less valuable, and Nick told you that in cases of technology like typing, it enhanced the value of society. The problem with all of this, as Nikki explained to you, is that their own definition encompasses semi-autonomous and autonomous robots. Robots that, unlike computers, don't require the direction of people and instead can fully replace them. Because of that, the harms that we gave you, including massive unemployment and layoffs, particularly in the industrial and agricultural sectors, will result in millions, if not billions, of people losing their jobs. The next thing that we told you is that it's very difficult for people to get the adequate education to transition from manual labor in a factory towards advanced sectors like mechanical engineering. And all Nick here tells you is, well, education is changing, and robots will change education as well. The problem is he never really quite explained how robots would change education. Does he want a robotic teacher now? I'm not quite sure. The next thing, however, is that Nikki very clearly described to you the financial barrier to education. In most countries across the world, with the exception of some countries like France, it costs almost $100,000 to gain the adequate undergraduate and graduate education necessary for entry into the service and advanced mechanical sector. If side proposition wants to claim that millions of people can transition and that there'll be jobs available for them, they need to claim two things. First, that the cost of education will somehow change overnight, and secondly, that there will be enough demand for these jobs to fill every single one of them. The next thing that we told you is that this is a poor economic analysis. Producers won't simply pay workers more just because they need a consumer base. But what Nick and Sarah both said is that producers are altruistic. They want a consumer base and they want the economy of society to grow. This might make sense in their Econ 101 textbooks in the context of what's good for an economy, but it certainly doesn't make sense in the interests of employers, because employers and producers are selfish. They want to make the most profits, and as such, they will produce the most at the lowest cost possible. And within 10 or 20 years, the cost of a robot will be far less than hiring a person for the rest of their lifetimes. The next thing that they talked about are robots doing unwanted or dangerous jobs. And Nikki was very clear. He said, this isn't really part of the workforce because these aren't jobs that people could do in the first place. And all we got from the proposition are ridiculous examples. Cancer-solving robots, bloodstream entering robots. Madam Speaker, these are not the sort of jobs that people could fill. The next point was about leisure time. And they said, people might have more time to take away from work. The distinction between this and the previous changes that have taken place within the workforce is that previous changes still allowed people to work. Nick says that there would be a 5-hour work week after the Industrial Revolution. However, what we would tell you is that when robots take your job, you have a 0-hour work week. It also requires that there be an open sectors for people to fill. If they're talking about leisure time and more interesting jobs, they need to prove that those jobs actually exist. So let's go on to the points that opposition brought to you. In our first point, Nikki talked to you about how livelihoods would be dramatically worse on their side of the house. And he talked about how education doesn't exist and how there would be fewer workers hired. Side proposition chose not to respond to this and instead went directly to our second point. So let's take a look at that. What we told you was there would be massive inequality, that the 1% would control the vast majority of wealth. It's also worth noting that the 1% also control the vast majority of production of robots and the patents on robots. So on their side of the house, most of the people that benefit from the rapid growth of robots are the 1%, concentrating wealth even further. The next thing that they said was, well, it's not supported on our side of the house that workers would gain less control. Let me explain this argument. When robots totally replace the entire workforce, it creates a supply of workers who are unemployed but want to work. That gives employers dramatically more power over the people that they hire, allowing for greater labor abuses and for lower pay. Wouldn't you agree?
It's exactly in the situation that people are unemployed and want to work, but also can vote, in which they vote for more rights and shorter work weeks.
So you think that voting is the best way to regulate robots, when the people with the money, the people that can buy lobbies and influence in government, are also the people who are controlling the robots, big manufacturers, the new tech industry. These are the people who have the most influence in government. And as I think we've seen over the past several years, it's not votes that count in politics, it's the people that can buy money, buy advertisements, buy politicians. So let's look at the third constructive point that side opposition is going to bring to you in today's debate: learned helplessness. As in many of the points that Nick brought to you, there's going to be a massive surge of unemployment in the economy. People are going to lose their jobs, and many sectors, particularly in manual labor and agriculture, are going to be filled. People who have spent their entire lifetimes in these sectors will suddenly be laid off. In addition to the economic harms that this brings up, we think it'll give tremendous personal suffering. Now, Americans are very keen on evidence, so here's some. The National Institute of Health, in a 2013 study, found that people who are unemployed had greater rates of depression, anxiety, and somaticization. They found that a man who was unemployed was 5 times more likely to visit a psychiatrist than a counterpart, and 2 times more likely to take medication, including antidepressants. The truth of the matter is, when people are unemployed, they suffer. And on their side of the house, that would become even worse. Because when people are unemployed, as many factory workers are laid off, unable to put food on the table for themselves and their family, they'll spiral into mental anguish. And we don't think that's all right. But we also think that there's a difference between humans and robots that side proposition hasn't really gotten at. Humans are capable of aspiration. I never dreamed that I would be on the stage addressing this tournament. And it's also very important in the workforce because people can see how they can gain new jobs. There's a clear path out for them. They can gain education and attain a higher level of employment within the workforce. But in side propositions world, it's literally impossible for many people to enter the workforce because the financial barriers are too high, because robots have replaced their job. We think that this will cause people to stop looking for jobs because they feel inadequate and they feel helpless. Even in cases where people are capable of entering the workforce but choose not to do because they're hopeless, this will create a feedback loop. People won't enter the labor market, and the market will replace them with robots, a consistent cycle of people choosing not to enter and then being replaced. This cycle will only lead to more depression, more anxiety, even more suicide as people realize that they can't have any hope of putting food on the table for their families anymore, of living the fulfilling lives they hoped as children they would be able to. On Side Propositions World, we have a cold world in which robots are the majority of workers, where people don't have any way to make money or livelihood for themselves, and where the entirety of humanity is condemned to a dull existence. Madam Speaker, we don't think that's the right sort of world, and we strongly urge you to oppose.
What do you want me to say on in the intro? I was proud of you for how many shots you fired. Sure. Just give me one. I think it's effective. Yeah, I never anticipated the audience loves it. The audience loves it. One thing that I was trying to do was get a stronger reaction because, it'll influence that. Okay. So what they're going to try to win, and we should put this in POIs and they can win to change, and they can access the leisure society. So we need to prove that it's going to succeed. Holding out our analysis. In my first speech, I was like, this is why markets will happen fast. The rate of technology change is accelerating.
I'd now like to welcome the fifth speaker of the proposition, the last.
Entire markets.
Ladies and gentlemen, the march of time is ever forward. No side in this debate can stop that. The question is, who does a better job of predicting what will happen in the future? And it's clear. We must welcome the large march of robots into our future because not only does it benefit us pragmatically, but on the whole, we've seen these growths to be beneficial in the past. We've heard some interesting things from opposition. We've heard that an increase in productivity is ineffective despite having any warrants for that. We've also heard no analysis on our larger societal benefits, and we hear that you can never anticipate what happens in the future. But it's precisely for that reason that we prefer side proposition in today's debate, because we've seen this in the past and because we understand that in the future the market will adapt to account for any harms that side opposition may bring up. 3 questions in the speech. Firstly, what is practically beneficial to people? Secondly, what will happen to society on the whole? And thirdly, will the world adapt to robots or not? But firstly, what is practically beneficial to people? Both sides in today's debate make one fundamental agreement, that productivity will increase. But the difference is, on side opposition, they say an increase in productivity is bad. But they neglect the fact that we give you empiric analysis that prices go down. As it becomes easier for firms to produce goods, the prices of these goods will always go down, and that's a clear benefit to people in the long run. But then they go on to say that no one will be able to afford these goods even if prices are down. Now, this is a key point in today's debate. They fundamentally misunderstand economics. What they tell you is that firms will make money, and as long as they're making money, it doesn't matter who they have employed. If robots can provide them with more income, they would prefer robots over humans. But the fundamental mischaracterization they make is that firms cannot gain income and firms cannot make money unless they have someone to purchase their goods. And if no one is employed, no one is going to be purchasing these goods. There's no reason to prefer robots over humans, because if you don't have some humans in the workforce, you have no one to purchase your goods. Ultimately, they make a fundamental economic mischaracterization, but you disagree.
You assume that companies always act in the best interest of the economy as a whole. If that's true, why do we have stock bubbles and recessions? Companies have to be greedy, not foresighted like your economics textbook.
I completely agree that companies need to be greedy, but they focus on money, and they can't make any money unless people are employed. Because if no one has salaries, how is anyone going to buy their products? This is the link side opposition is missing. Without people being employed, no one makes incomes and no one can buy products. That's why people need to employ humans over robots in some situations. But then we tell you that education will adapt. And the only argument they have against this is that there's no logic for us. But we've seen this in the past time and time again. Education in ancient Greece was predicated upon music, math, and philosophy. But in the world today, it's transitioned to meet the needs of the job market. As the job market adapts, so too does education adapt to meet those needs. It's happened in the past and it'll happen again. Even if they argue that robots are fundamentally different, essentially they're just another change to the market. Printers replaced humans. Printers were fully autonomous. No one needed to transcribe anything again. And the education market adapted to account for this. Essentially, we see that education is always something that's responsive to what the workforce needs. But then we tell you that this helps people in dangerous jobs. And they don't really have a great response to this. All they tell you is first that these aren't positions in the workforce, so we're not actually benefiting anyone. But last time I checked, we need people to clean up oil spills. We need people in the nuclear reactors of Fukushima to clean it up. We need people to account for these dangerous jobs. These are all positions in the workforce that are better served by robots than humans. We're saving lives by preferring robots in these situations.
However the number is for the number of nuclear power plants in the world, I hardly think it qualifies as a large number of robots in the workforce.
Side opposition is so keen to point this out every time. We give you examples of oil spills, of medicine, of other examples in which robots are so crucial, and they continuously say these aren't large numbers. How much does side opposition want? We can't continuously list out examples like we've already done. At the point at which we're help saving lives and productivity is increasing, it's clear a large number of robots is beneficial to the individual person. But then let's ask our second question: what will happen to society? Ultimately, society on the whole will be stronger as the march of technology advances. All they give you on this analysis is that autonomous robots will replace humans, and that's bad for society. But crucially, autonomous robots have been replacing humans for centuries. We saw this with the printer. We saw this with other inventions that have replaced fundamental human jobs. Candle makers in the past were such a great job, but now we have manufacturing lines to account for this, and the market has adapted. People move into other jobs when autonomous robots take their job. But that's certainly not a reason to prefer side opposition. The printer was a reason. So long as there are autonomous robots, there will always be other options. But then they tell you that only intellectual jobs will remain. And that's simply false. We give you examples of the service industry, of music, of all sorts of areas of society where people are preferred. But then they give you these analysis based on the hotel in Japan and say that's an example of robots taking up the service industry. But the only reason it happened there was because the demographic demanded it. And at the point at which a demographic demands something, the market needs to compensate. But there are certainly jobs in industries that don't require extensive education that you can still enter in this world of side proposition. Essentially, you don't need to have a PhD to be in the service industry. It's still something that's clearly accessible to everyone. And people like to work with other people. This is analysis that side opposition hasn't responded to, so let's extend it a little bit. People enjoy being served by other human beings. When you're being played to music to by a robot, it's not as preferable as when another human like Led Zeppelin is playing you a song. When people desire to be played music to by other people, companies and employers have to respond to the demand of the marketplace. When people desire other people, the market will adapt to accommodate that need. But ultimately, then they talk to you about inequality and tell you that inequality will be increased in society. But again, this is a fundamental mischaracterization. They never tell you why inequality is bad. They just drop inequality and say that it's a huge reason to not prefer robots. But ultimately, firstly, we see in the past, as inequality has risen and as technology has gone forward, the median incomes of people on the whole have risen. Although inequality may be rising, everyone is richer on the whole, and it's certainly not a reason to think that inequality is a bad thing. People aren't going to lose their jobs because of this. But the final issue we have on the societal question is that of voting, and it's been highly contentious in today's debate. They tell you that money controls politics, and that lobbyists will control voting regardless. But essentially, money has controlled politics for decades and centuries, but we still had child labor laws passed, we still had factory regulations passed, and we still had all other sorts of job safety regulations passed, despite the fact that money has always controlled politics. We see this because ultimately the economy is responsive. If everyone's unemployed, these people who vote are still going to have more power than lobbyists. Voting is still the ultimate power in politics, regardless of what side opposition may tell you. But the final question we need to ask, and it's really a summary, is what will happen to the world? Ultimately, the march of technology is ever forward. Both sides acknowledge that in today's debate, but side opposition makes a fundamental mischaracterization. The past is prologue. We see that every time a new technology has been introduced into the market, be it printing, candle making, any other form of specific technology, the market and jobs have always adapted to account for this. The market always shifts to accommodate new jobs. No one and everyone will never always be unemployed. Ultimately, when we analyze this resolution, it's key. Please propose.
Okay.
You can get a lot less with this. Yeah. Just in case you need the power buttons later.
Okay.
Let's now welcome the last substantive speaker, Sun-Hee.
Side proposition is quick to tell you that we're constantly running away from things that have helped us in the past. But they're failing to see that they have never answered the fact that robots are something that we just haven't dealt with yet. We know that the United States is very keen on using examples for pretty much everything, but they definitely do have to show some type of analysis. Historical trends are not absolute, especially if we're looking at something that's completely different from the past. They constantly talk about how the Luddites and how they were afraid that these computers were going to destroy their cities, but we have things like nuclear plants that did destroy their cities. Technology is not always something that's uniquely beneficial or will always help everyone. Now, with that being said, we have 3 clash points in this debate. The first is this really a gradual change? The second will be in regards to inequality and unemployment. And the third one will be the future of the human race. Will robots really lead us to a bright and wonderful future? Now, starting with the first clash point on whether this is a gradual change or not. Technology right now has been able to replace entire markets. Sarah was quick to use the example of her phone and how it allows for her to translate and communicate with different people, but this has taken away numerous amount of jobs, and while it has made things easier, it has definitely fired a bunch of people. They're constantly talking about how the system is going to correct itself and that unemployment is not necessarily going to happen because people still consume goods. First, once again, we say that just because you may know your economics textbooks doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else does, especially employers. For example, they're constantly looking at their profits. They're constantly looking about whether they're going to spend more money or save more money. They're not concerned with reading Economics 101. Additionally, we talk about how these systems are not necessarily going to engage in this gradual change because even with the examples that they give us, whether it is in regards to cancerous robots or cleaning up toxic spills, they're constantly going to be involved in institutions that are only going to harm more employment. Yes.
You keep discussing how employers only look to their profit margins, but if their profit margins go to zero because no one is employed and can buy anything, they'll be forced to reckon with the fact that they need to change their ways.
Okay, even if the profit margins do end up going to zero, I would say that's first off a problem with introducing robots into the workforce in the first place. We probably shouldn't have put them there if that's the problem that's going to happen. That's something that side proposition would definitely have to agree on. Secondly, it's not always about boring economics. These are people with real lives who have to provide for their families. And that brings me to the second point, which is inequality and unemployment. Now, enough with the boring economics. Let's look at the people who are directly going to be affected. How are you going to tell a single father who has lost his job to a robot that, hey, you have a lot of leisure time, it's okay that you can't provide for your kids? That doesn't logically make sense. There's not going to be a way that these individuals are going to provide for their family or necessarily guarantee some type of hope in the future. We're also saying that a large amount, they're also assuming that we're saying everyone's jobs are going to be replaced. We recognize that not everyone's jobs are going to be replaced, but the motion does talk about a massive amount of robots. That means a massive amount of jobs are going to be lost. The 1% is easily going to be able to control this type of power and the individuals who are being employed in the first place. Additionally, they talk about things like, well, you can go into the music industry because people don't like hearing music from robots. First off, lots of people have iPods. They can listen to robots playing their music. Additionally, we have things like telegrams or things like that where they play things like Tupac on stages and people pay to see that. I don't see why people wouldn't want to replace musicians either. Additionally, not everyone can be a musician. Once again, let's be rooted in reality. Not everyone's going to be the next Lady Gaga. Not everyone's going to be a musician. Rather, we have to look to technicians, we have to look to doctors, we even have to look to the commonplace workers, the engineers, who are going to lose their jobs because robots can do it quicker and better. Additionally, they're not taking into account that voting doesn't solve anything. As Jasper pointed out in his last speech, when we look at voting, a lot of it is controlled by the people who are at the top. If so many people are being unemployed, the majority of instances are going to be controlled by the popular and most expensive politics, not necessarily the everyday citizen. Yeah.
You asserted that the iPhone caused many people to lose jobs, but actually created a majority for people who were working in things like the Apple Store and the service sector that require people. They just can't seem to realize that you can't anticipate future jobs.
Okay, that's fine. So just because people can work in Apple stores, once again, there's not Apple stores on every corner. There are still lots of jobs that need to be filled. Additionally, I was specifically talking about things like iPods that are going to necessarily replace music. Additionally, we're also, back to the voting point, if individuals are not going to vote, they're not going to guarantee that unemployment benefits are going to go to them or that unemployment is not going to disproportionately harm them. For example, in the status quo, a lot of people don't turn out to vote anyway. If you live in this quote-unquote leisure society, why would people complain about it in the first place? Rather, you're allowing for a society of complacency where individuals are not going to be able to help themselves. This brings us specifically to our point of inequality. Not only are individuals disenfranchised because they're unemployed, but now they lose things like bargaining power. Their worker is not going to listen to them because they can simply hire other robots. They can simply hire different workers who are either going to comply to the system and get things like $2 an hour, or they can just replace them entirely. That being said, it brings us to our third and most important clash point in this debate, encompassing most of the arguments that happened in this round, which is, what is the future of the human race and whether robots are actually going to address this? Now, before I start, let's start with this education argument. Now, they constantly talk about how robots are going to fix everything and that the education system's magically going to adjust itself. First off, the only way this is possibly going to happen is if robots completely take over the education system too, as Jasper suggested. There's no reason why people are going to magically be able to become mechanical engineers who are going to create robots or work in Apple stores or necessarily have higher education that's going to allow them to get some type of higher job or get paid even more. Additionally, they also talk about robots that are going into blood cells and killing cancer cells. So now you want to take the jobs of doctors too? If we can't even aspire to be doctors, surgeons, teachers, lawyers, at that point, what is the point? They're talking about the service industry, but they're giving example after example of where robots are replacing those in the service industry. If that's true, there is literally no benefit to side proposition. While they're trying to say that all of these future gains are going to be made and all these technological advances are going to happen, we have to ask ourselves, at what cost? If we're preventing people from getting not only higher education, but getting jobs that they want and being able to provide for their family, the future doesn't look too bright. Additionally, they constantly talk about how there is going to be no type of replacement and that people are going to simply live in a leisurely society. Of course, they're going to live in a leisure society because they literally have nothing to do. You don't provide any way that they're going to sustain their lives. You don't provide any way in which they're going to have part-time jobs. Rather, most of these jobs are going to simply be replaced by robots who are more efficient. A leisure society is not something that we want to move towards. The Industrial Revolution leading to lesser work hours is not what side proposition is proposing.
Rather, we're moving into a new future that's only going to lead to more disenfranchisement amongst the minority classes, amongst people who are unequal, and lead to more disenfranchisement. For example, individuals will simply become more displaced. They'll be looked at as replaceable. They'll never be considered worthy of having jobs that robots have. And when we see that in the status quo, we see things like inequality, oppression, mass incarceration rates. When people are not useful, society doesn't find them useful and disposes of them. Side proposition doesn't create a new and bright future. Rather, they create a dystopia in which we have no type of opportunity. And for those reasons, I'm proud to oppose.
History will repeat itself in this round. Last year I took first and you took second, so either way history is repeating itself. I mean, you could. It's like, because their narrative was so funny, so you could disprove it. Say, like, history is actually indicative of the future because there's so many different things.
Do whatever you need to do, but, like, it's close. Like, they haven't done that well. We're beating them on economics. You just need to explain that better. Because it makes sense. Like, if employers don't have anyone, like, buying their shit, they're not going to do anything.
I mean, I think also if you just prove that what they're saying is far more speculative than what we're saying about job loss, then that'll get us a big edge. Because, like, we are actually grounded in the biggest
They never
changes.
really addressed voting. Like,
Well, they just say, like, people have money or...
Yeah.
They did address it.
I mean, they said the same thing.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'd now like to welcome back Nikki to summarise team
But I think if you get back at Jasper's jokes, that'll be pretty funny because it'll undermine, like, the concept of the future. Just say the concept of the future.
Team Proposition is eager to race into the future. But if we're going to move that fast, I'd prefer it if we took our blindfolds off first. Because all that Team Proposition is doing is blindly assuming that the lessons of the past are absolute, that nothing changes, and that we can rely on the basic forces of the past. But what we have shown you time and time again is a coherent vision of the future, an explanation as to why this is different, and a reason as to why we should not welcome into our homes and into our lives that only brings suffering and challenge. In this speech, I'll be addressing three things. Firstly, can we apply a historical model to this round? Secondly, will unemployment increase? And thirdly, will the workers and the people benefit? But firstly, is history a model? Now, this is the fundamental assumption of Team Proposition. It's one they spend the first 4 minutes of this round explaining, that this is simply the march of history. But we have told you time and time again, no. This is not the same as what has come before. Let me remind you of the analysis that we presented all the way back in the first speech, that firstly, the rate of technological change is accelerating, meaning that we have less and less time to respond. Secondly, that this is something that is fundamentally different from before, because rather than increasing the productivity of the worker, we supplant the worker with something that looks and does the same things, different from history. Thirdly, we explain to you that because this concentrates more power in the hands of a wealthy few, previous things like political change or educational reform no longer function. We have provided that analysis time and time again throughout the round, and their only real response has been to continually repeat, like a broken machine, that this is gradual change. When we've explained to you clearly why this would not be gradual change and why we should not use history as a model, they refuse to respond to that analysis, but still ask you to decide this round on that assumption. Now, the second question for today is, will unemployment increase? And again, I'm going to have to ask you to think all the way back to speech 1, where we presented a very clear stance as to why unemployment would increase. Firstly, because even though it might not be in the interest of the overall economy to replace all human workers, individual employers don't act in the need of the overall economy. In much the same way, everyone hurts when the stock market crashes, but we still get bubbles because everyone's buying in a selfish way. If humans were perfect, we wouldn't have recessions. At the end of the day, we're selfish, and market forces can lead us to the detriment of overall society. We've explained to you why competition mandates the adoption of robots, even if overall it will harm society. I am still waiting for a response to that analysis. Secondly, we explain to you why they have this huge contradiction in their case, where they come up here and say, unemployment won't be a very big deal because we'll create plenty of new jobs. Then they turn around and argue that robots will take over every job, allowing all of us to live in a society of leisure. I ask the proposition to pick one. Are we all going to be replaced, or is unemployment not going to be an issue? They cannot argue both in this round. Thirdly, will the workers and the people benefit? What we have told you is that robots stand to benefit one precious group, either those who can own robots or those who are rich enough to become educated. Time and time again, their answer to every one of our arguments is go to school and become a mechanical engineer. I challenge you to tell that to the millions, to the billions around the globe who can't even afford to go to secondary school, let alone university. As much as it is hard for this room of people to admit, education is a luxury good, and to rely on it as a solution for the common worker is short-sighted and is ineffective. At the end of the day, what this policy does is line the pockets of those who already have the money to benefit, those who can afford to buy the robots, those who can afford to stay afloat in the new economy. We do not think that those people are the ones that you should vote for. We think the people that you should decide for are the ones who stand to suffer, the ones who stand to be replaced. And because we have not forgotten them, it is an honor to ask you to oppose.
And to conclude the debate, let's welcome back Nicholas.
Thing about I think the question is good.
This debate has been happening for centuries, from the time of the ancient Greeks to the time of the Luddites to today. Go talk to Tuna, who remembers debating whether information technology, like the computer or the mobile phone, would unemploy vast sectors of the economy. Their argument is robots are different. The argument is always that it's different. But I beg you to actually learn from history as you look forward. History is our only guide. Past is prologue. And if you are ignoring these historical trends, then you're ignoring the only evidence that we really have on how we can look forward. So, I have 3 clashes on this debate to show you why we should welcome robots. First of all, jobs, what happens to them. Second of all, which results in a greater benefit to society. And third, whether or not robots are different. I actually switched my order. I'm going to do robots are different first. So, now let's go on to the first clash, that robots are different. The opposition just claims that because robots are autonomous, that they are different. I'm telling you that printers are essentially autonomous too. You just plug your USB in, and they print like hundreds and hundreds of copies of something. That means that they replace workers in the exact same way that robots do. It doesn't make sense for them to say robots are different, and then just like expect to win that clash. And the truth is that all of their arguments are predicated on the idea that robots are different. And they haven't proven that, they've just asserted it. When you look at their arguments about job loss, they think, because robots are different, again, just an assertion, that these jobs will be lost en masse, that the gradual change is going to happen immediately. That means that they've lost that argument because they've only asserted like the basic link inside of it. Now let's go on to the second clash about jobs and what happens to them. So the opposition comes up and tell you that it's a 0-hour work week when a robot takes your job, that there's huge, awful effects about unemployment like learned helplessness. Well, we'd like to tell you that their basic characterization of the way individual business owners are going to treat the economy is wrong. This is kind of the entire point that this argument rests on, whether or not individual business owners are actually whether or not they know Econ 101. We'd like to say that they've taken business school, right? They actually know the way supply-side economics works. That even though they're greedy, mass production requires mass consumption. That without somebody to get your income from, what's the point of producing if you're live under that capitalist framework? That you do need an employed sector of people in order to get that kind of money. We've also told you that there's a bunch of places that can take up these jobs over a gradual change in the way jobs are created, and we don't even always know the way these jobs are created. My first speaker came up and told you, the iPhone replaced a bunch of people, but now we have people working in factories to create iPhones too, right? It opens up so many different opportunities, some of which we know, like the service sector, and some of which we don't know about yet. Okay. Now, let's go on to the awesome effects that robots actually have. We've told you that they can create 100% effectiveness in surgery. We've told you that they can enter your bloodstream and kill cancer. Yeah, those are like actually entering the workforce. They replace people like doctors. They replace people like oncologists. They say that there is a perceived contradiction here because, we say both that jobs over time will be lost and so people will be able to like use their voting to increase their rights. But this is, again, a lack of nuance inside their case. We're talking about things as they happen in general trends over time. They're not. And so this brings me to general benefit for society. Let's look at them. They only say, capital will become everything. But we've told you that this will result in more production, cheaper goods. People will be able to do things like vote for increased rights for themselves. Leisure time in society is going to increase because over the centuries that we've seen technology advance, we've seen that people are willing to vote for more rights. That people, when they see themselves living in a world of abundance and mass production, they don't just sit down and just stay unemployed. They use their power of voting to gain more rights. They think that the average person is going to be hurt by the introduction of the robot. We're here to tell you that throughout history we've seen that technology means that every one of you are going to have more rights. That technology means that every one of you will have more things. That technology will result in a better world overall. That's why we've won.
Okay, thank you both sides.
Okay, we are immediately starting with the closing ceremony. Okay, guys. Okay, guys. Yeah, we need to start immediately with the closing ceremony because it's a train at 6:25 and a lot of people who are here need to catch it, okay? So we will start with thanking, Alyosha, where are you? I need Alyosha also for the certificates. First, it was a great tournament. I hope that you like it. It seems that you like it. I hope you will come next year. I would really like to thank again to the school, the principal, Liana and Martina, all the teachers and volunteers who were doing a great job at this tournament. And a huge applause for that. Of course, also everybody who were hosting, there were almost 80 debaters staying in the homes of the students of Gimnazja Franca Miklusicza Ljutomer. I do think that they're there, and their parents really deserve a huge applause again. And of course, we should thank all the judges, the coaches who prepared you, the people who were judging, and Alyosha and Nate who were doing the tap. And we were, okay? Alyosha, can you just keep the mouse down? Okay, now a couple of information. Look, guys, all the results after this ceremony, we will post the PDF of all the ballots and all the results on the Facebook page of this event. And later on, when I will be able to reach the email, and I will send also to all the coaches who participated here, in case somebody is not on the Facebook. So you will be able to check the whole tab, all results, and all your ballots. Okay? So, including the certificate of participation, which is signed by me and stamped. Then if you want to have a certificate of participation, you just type your name in and print it. So that we avoid to giving away, yeah? Okay? I did sign in though. Okay, now, first certificates we will be giving away is the certificates like this tournament. It's international tournament, but it's also count as a national tournament for Slovenia for English, for people who debate in English. So I will recognize now the first best speakers from Slovenia as part of the national tournament, and then 3 best Slovenian team at this tournament. Then we go to the tournament as a whole, okay? Okay, 5th speaker from Slovenia, 5th best was Anna, and I like that people come here because we have papers to give away. We did print these ones. Anna Wilhelmina Vernik, 5th speaker. Fourth speaker, Daniel Azaz. Okay. 3rd speaker, Arthur Louis Heath. Okay. 2nd speaker, Masha Mlinaric. I think they left already. Yeah. It too? Oh, great. And the best speaker, Egon Prešak. Okay. And don't leave because you're also the best 3 teams. Okay, then as team, third best Slovenian team here is Bežigrad Red Stars, which are here. Okay, give them and leave. Second best, Logos, Masha. Third best, Druga Maribor, Egon. Okay, go now. Go. Okay, guys, I do apologize because I'm rushing so much, but it's really, people need to leave, okay? Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, now the best 10 speakers of the tournament, 10 best. 10 speaker is Luka Bakovic. Come here. Ninth speaker is Sam Meliev. Sam, okay. 8th speaker is Eren Kafadar. Really nice. Eren, okay. 7th speaker, I do apologize for my pronunciation. Urmi Palatsing. Urmi? Yeah, she's coming. 6th speaker, Nicholas Angelopoulos. Okay, great. 5th speaker, Simon Martina Perez. Yeah, just go. Somebody's making pictures of this when they will be all together, right? Yeah? Is somebody making photo of them when they will be all 10 here? 4th speaker, Max Kosian. Okay, yeah. Now for the best 3 speakers, we don't have only certificates, but we also have a type of a cap, which is a little different than usual, because it does represent the person by whom the school is named. Like Franz Miklušić was a very famous Slovenian linguist, very responsible for development of Slovenian language, okay? And I don't really know details, but I think they are written there. But he was a famous guy. Did a lot of good for Slovenia. Okay, third speaker is Jasper Primak. Principal. Okay. Second best speaker at the tournament is Egon Peršak. Še dobiš kipec, veš? Še dobiš kipec. Dobiš pokale. And the best speaker of the 13th Youtuber International Tournament is Floris Holstedt. Okay. Stay together that they can make the picture of all of you. Okay, pause, make photos. Photos time. Okay, we would like to give the certificate to the quarterfinalist teams. Please, all three debaters from this quarterfinal teams come up. Netherlands red. All three debaters, please. Netherlands blue. To blue. Croatia A. Mostar B. Croatia, okay. And Mostar. Okay. Okay. Photo. Well, now we have two teams which lost in the semifinals, and we needed to establish, because we have only 3 cups for first, second, and third place. So, and we did it on the basis of the results of the semifinals. So one quarterfinals results, right? On the on the quarterfinal results. One quarterfinal, like before they entered the semifinals, they won. One team won 3-0, and the other team won 2-1. So basically, that means that the team winning 2-1 in quarterfinals becomes a 4th team in this tournament. That's Druga Maribor. Please come up. Okay. Daj, pejte sem. Postavite se tja, ker vas bo Miha slikal. Lepo. Ne? Okay. Ne, ja, ne. Okay. The third team at this tournament is Netherlands White. I don't know. We printed all. We printed all. We printed like you being first, you being runner-up, so on the same time we have all. I don't know. And now a photo. Yeah. Like you should pose there, right? See? Okay. And now I would like to call the chair of the final round, Claire Ryan, to announce the winner of the tournament.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was a close but clear debate. We had to decide whether or not the utopians or the dystopians won, whether it was those who believed in leisure or the Luddites, whether you'd prefer to listen to Lady Gaga or a robot. I'll keep my preference to myself. Normally I go through style, content and strategy. I'm aware that there's time constraints. This was won by the team that in the clash took the most points from the other team or shored up their own argument. First of all, there was the issue of whether robots are different or not, whether they are the same historically or by analogy historical. The proposition said they were allied to printers. The opposition said they weren't, they were different. We found that the proposition took that point. The next point was on the issue of productivity versus unfairness. Did the productivity that came about through the use of robots overcome the disparity that was caused by that? The proposition argued that businesses were relatively unselfish. Although they were greedy and profiteering, they would realise that if they cut out employees entirely, nobody would buy their products. The opposition argued that with profiteering and greed comes myopia, to add to the dystopia, and that there are recessions, which shows that employers are greedy and short-sighted. And we found that the opposition took that point. There was an argument as to whether robots were a gradual change, allowing the world around them to adapt and to adjust, and for education to transform as time went on, or whether the profiteering desire for instant and quick productivity meant a fast change. We found the opposition took that point. When it came to the issue of taking jobs, the proposition argued that new jobs would be created. They mentioned the new robots that would do medical things. The opposition argued that this showed not just the taking of the jobs in the service industry, but other jobs as well. And we found the opposition took that point as well. The argument as to voting, people have votes, even though they might be disempowered by their employer, they can still use the power of the ballot box to persuade governments to ensure employment. The opposition came back and argued, first of all, there's apathy in voting. Secondly of all, voting is controlled by those with the power and the money and the lobbyists, and also with the helplessness caused by the loss of jobs and the doing nothing, as opposed to enjoying leisure. The helpless would feel inadequate and be unable to vote. We found the opposition took that argument as well. Overall, we found that what the proposition had to prove was that in the having more things, in the more productivity, that had to significantly trump the disparity and the losses that were caused, and we found the opposition was better at showing those losses, in fact, trumped that productivity. So Jasper, you're right. Your team has won. Congratulations.
Okay. Thank you all for coming, and that means that the tournament is over. Safe travel home, and come next year.